Let's talk a little bit about why we're here. So, for those of you that know California Association of Nonprofits, CalNonprofits, thank you for coming back and joining us. For members, thank you and welcome. For those who are not yet, you'll see why you might be motivated after this. But essentially, we are three things. So, the California Association of Nonprofits, founded in the mid 1980s to be a meeting space for all of California's nonprofit sector, and that is all 110,000 501c3 public charities here in California. So, a massive infrastructure of nonprofit organizations doing virtually any mission you can conceive of in support of our communities, our health, our wellness across the great state of California. We do essentially three things. So we are a policy and advocacy organization. We work on policy to make sure that the landscape undergirding the nonprofit sector is as friendly and supportive and helpful as possible. We try to knock down barriers where we see them, right size relationships, make sure that our various partners across public and private sectors as well are in the best possible space to support the work that we all share. So we work on bills, we work on rules, we work with legislators, we work with executive offices, and we work with our DOJ on a regular basis. We also work through our national partners, and of course today we're going to have a broader national conversation as well as one focusing on what's happening here in California. We are part of the National Council of Nonprofits, and we work collectively with the other 51 regional and state associations across this country. We are also an education organization, so we try to do our best to translate what policy means to the field for those of us doing the work on the ground, and vice versa, what the folks doing the work on the ground need from our policymakers. Education for us generally is around the structural issues. It's the HR, it's the tax policy, it's grants and contracts, it's all of the compliance work that we do just to make sure people have their best, most current information available to them. And finally, data and research. So when we see good data, and all of us in the nonprofit sector know that good data is sometimes very hard to come by, we find it, we make sure people have access to it, and in cases where we don't see it, we will partner with research institutions and individual researchers to get it. So that is our piece around data and research. So all that said, we are a membership organization, and we proudly have thousands of members here across the state of California doing this work. So today, we are here to speak with one of our national leaders, Congressman Robert Garcia, elected to the U.S. House of Representatives not all that long ago in November of 2022. He's former mayor of Long Beach, and in that short time has ascended to a critical post, something that we have all seen him use to great effect. And that is the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability. He is the ranking member there. And so when we talk about the things that are happening at the federal level with respect to redefining what is acceptable nonprofit work, with the Trump administration putting various barriers in front of certain organizations, when we talk about freezing funds and grants, when we talk about outright attacks and legal strategies aimed against the nonprofit sector, it is Congressman Garcia who is often the voice to push back and defend a lot of what we do here. So, Congressman, welcome. We're grateful that you made some time for us here this morning, and we would love to hear from you. Obviously, we have some questions queued up for you, but before we get to that, I just want to give you the floor and say thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks, Geoff. And just thanks to everybody that is here. Look, I think it's really important to acknowledge, obviously, the work that all of our nonprofits do, not just across the state, but across the country. I've worked for nonprofit organizations. I think if you are I always say, if you're a good citizen, you've either worked for one, or you have interacted with one, or you volunteered for one, or you've donated to one. And so obviously a huge part of our economy, of folks that are just doing the right thing, doing the best work, really reside in the nonprofit work. And as we also know, nonprofit work has huge impacts on people's livelihoods, on their success, on their ability to provide for their families, really helps people, whether it's workforce training or the advancement of civil rights, or whether it's sure people know how to be good parents or how to take care of our future generations of kids. It obviously touches every single part of us as humans and how we live. But we also know that government also has a big impact on nonprofits. And that's where my current job comes in and kind of what I thought we would talk a little bit about. I wanted to share just a few things about what I kind of do in Congress, what my role is, and then most importantly, just open it up for any questions that you all might have as it relates to where things are at with the Congress and the government and nonprofit, particularly here in California. And there's distinctions that fortunately or unfortunately end up happening because we're Californians. And oftentimes we are the, in the line of fire because some folks choose not to like our state for a variety of reasons. And we get used as examples often for things. And so I think that's an important thing for us to talk about as well and to understand. Broadly speaking, I am new to Congress. I served as the mayor of Long Beach for 8 years. And after that, I got elected to Congress now about 3.5 years ago. So I'm what you would consider a sophomore in Congress. When I came on as a freshman, there were 37 members of my Democratic freshman class. I was elected president of the class. I was president of my freshman class, which was a great opportunity for me to kind of promote our class and get to know the leadership and get to know the Congress really well. And then beyond that, I just got really involved. I got assigned to two committees. One was the Transportation Committee, which I'm on right now, and then the Oversight Committee. And I didn't really know a lot about the Oversight Committee except what I'd sometimes seen on TV. I knew it was the lead investigations committee in the Congress. I knew that that's where all the big, oftentimes kind of high-profile investigations go. And the Oversight Committee's job is to investigate corruption and to try to make government work better. It's the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. And so that's really what the committee is all about. And as a new sophomore, unfortunately, our leader of our committee on the Democratic side passed away, really sad. And there was an opening on the committee. And the way Congress typically works is the most senior person gets elected to be the next person. That's just, I think it's a terrible system, but that's just the way it's always worked. And so as a sophomore, I started talking to folks and saying, "Hey, I think I might run to lead the committee." And you have to run to the entire caucus. And so there's, at the time, I think it was maybe 214 Democrats or so, and then the caucus, the number changes a little bit depending on special elections. And so you have to win a majority of the caucus to get elected to lead committees. And I was telling folks, "Hey, I think I might run," and everybody's immediate reaction was like, "We should definitely not do that because you're only a sophomore." And it's interesting. We looked it up, and when I ran, a sophomore had not been elected to lead any committee in 102 years in the United States House. And so the odds were definitely like stacked against me. And of course, the person that was the most next senior person, who's been in Congress now for a couple decades, and he's a great congressman, by the way. He, of course, was running, and so it was just expected that he would win, which is how these elections go. And I ran. We won a huge margin, and broke, obviously, made a little history along the way, and now I have this great honor of leading what I believe is most important committee in the Congress, which is the Oversight Committee, and still being really fairly new to Congress, which I think is a good thing because honestly, it's a disaster. The U.S. House is so antiquated. The rules are antiquated. The way we do things need to be modernized. And I think we need newer, younger, more aggressive voices in the Congress. And I think that's why I got elected. So I've been now about a year, I've led the Democrats. And the way committees work is whoever's in the majority, which right now are Republicans in the House, right? They lead the House. And Republicans lead the Senate, the majority in the Senate. They're the ones that control the committees and control the chairs. So I'm not the chair of Oversight. I'm what you call the ranking member or the leader of the Democrats on Oversight. And if and when Democrats win the majority in November, which, if you look at polling and other things, looks like it's more likely than not, but not for sure, then I would become the chairman of the Oversight Committee starting in January, which would be really really great. I'm really looking forward to that if that's what ends up happening, which is why I'm working so hard on all these elections and campaigns. And why that's important is because, as relates to all of you, is the reality of my perspective. And look, I'm sure on this call we have a variety of different opinions and political perspectives. We've got Democrats, Republicans, people that are independent, all sorts of folks. But what I tell folks is, I'm going to give you my perspective. You may agree with all of it. You may disagree with some of it. I think that nonprofits are under attack. I think that the ability for nonprofits to make decisions about who they hire, who they give grants to, support from the federal government, what's expected of you, the type of reporting that the federal government is now asking for. These are all things that are currently under debate and that are being pushed by the administration. Grants are being held back in many cases. Some grants are being completely eliminated without explanation. And so there's a lot that nonprofits right now are going through. I talk to nonprofit leaders locally in my community all the time. I represent the city of Long Beach, and then I represent cities in Southeast Los Angeles. So all the way from like the top of my district, there's cities like Commerce and Huntington Park, and it goes all the way south through Downey into the city of Long Beach and Catalina Island. So it's a pretty large area. And I talk to folks all the time whether it's partners in our museum or arts nonprofit space, or whether it's our education centers or other folks that are working in other education spaces. There's all sorts of workforce development. People are pretty frustrated with what's happening now. Now, a lot of nonprofits have really navigated this time pretty well and have been successful, but certain nonprofits have been in a harder place. And I think especially if you're in certain areas where you're doing work around inclusion and equity, or if you're doing work that uplifts traditionally marginalized communities of color, LGBTQ plus communities, you're doing arts, you're doing museum work. There are certainly some nonprofit healthcare, being decimated in many ways.
Yeah.
There's a lot of nonprofits that are really struggling. And so that is something that we're watching. And so our job right now is, because there is a unified government, which is all controlled by one party, there's little we can do to stop some of what is happening. We go to the courts often, and the courts are stopping a lot of actions. Like I remember early on when the president wanted to essentially stop all these grants that were going to nonprofits and decide who was going to get the grants. And he's still trying to do that, by the way. They're trying to switch it so that political appointees do grants versus career, which would be a disaster, by the way. You don't want politics involved in grant making, in giving out grants, whether it's Democrats or Republicans. You just don't want that. You want civil career people to do that work. And so I think that you're seeing what's happening. And so for us in a unified one-party government, it's difficult to have influence. We can organize, we can protest when we certainly have gone to court, so we can get people to pressure, and some of that's worked. But that's why I'm so strongly supportive of breaking this one-party monopoly in November. And if Democrats win, that would provide at least a balance for the next couple of years, where would you still have a President Trump, who I think has been quite hostile to nonprofits. You would have a Democratic Congress, hopefully both a House and a Senate, that could use the budget and can use the power of law creation, and certainly more importantly, the power of passing the federal budget to negotiate with the president and to stop some of the worst of what's happening right now in the administration. So that's kind of where we're at right now. As the chair of the Oversight Committee, I would have pretty broad power to stop all these ridiculous investigations that are coming out of the Oversight Committee right now. The Oversight Committee right now is attacking nonprofits across the country, especially if you're involved in any sort of equity or diversity or inclusion work, or believe that that DEI is not a bad word, but that there's nothing wrong with having diversity in organizations or in the country, or equity or inclusion. These are really basic foundational work and projects that are founded in kind of who we are as good humans. And so I think that that'll all end. I'm not going to have any time for these horrific investigations that really do nothing but cost people a lot of work and trauma and are expensive and so forth. And so that's kind of where things are at in a snapshot right now. There are, from a California perspective, I'd be the only Californian that would from a California perspective on the oversight committee leading that. The other top, I'm trying to think who'd be the other Californians that we would have on oversight that are. David Min is on the oversight committee, which is great. He's from Orange County. Just going down the line. So right now, yeah, there aren't a ton of Californians. Ro Khanna, who's a great member, would be kind of some of the key Californians on the committee. And with that, I'll pass it off to any questions y'all might have.
Great. Well, thank you, Congressman. You mentioned your district. I think we have a lot of partners. We cover the whole state, and of course, folks like the Nonprofit Partnership (TNP) there in Long Beach are longstanding partners, and I know we've got a lot of folks right there in your district, as well as across the state, who are all suffering the same things that you just outlined. Just yesterday, I was with Senator. We had a conversation, I guess, about this on the Senate side about what could be done. What I'm wondering is, you mentioned the investigations. What we've seen in the last year and a half are a whole range of these oversight hearings, which honestly, come out of Saturday Night Live were it not for the fact that they're real now. Things called NGOs gone wild and that sort of messaging. And of course, we don't see a lot of impact on the ground for those, but we certainly, it's a narrative that gets spun. We, as you mentioned, see nonprofits that are doing DEI work, immigration work, and just involved in advocacy in general, which of course we're big trainers and supporters of, and all getting targeted, at least verbally, if not actually investigated or named on lists, things like that. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, you've shared a little bit about what you can do. What are the things that the nonprofit sector, that the leadership that we work closely with day in and day out across the state can do to protect itself from these sort of politically motivated inquiries, public relations, or at least narrative attacks, the things that you just highlighted? Any advice for things that you've seen from where you sit that are effective for our sector to do?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think a couple of things. I think one is nonprofits are in a very difficult space. I mean, you all operate on most nonprofits are smaller, right? And you're operating with really tight budgets and a lot of flexibility to bring in high-priced lawyers. And honestly, that's what I think what's really scary about this moment is the demands that you're all being asked to do and change, and how you're trying to navigate these federal applications while still being true to your values, I think is difficult. What I would say is, I try to tell people back home, and I've actually, it's funny, I'm following the chat a little bit, and I'm seeing a bunch of people pop up that are from Long Beach or from my area, which is great. I love seeing that, so it's great. And I would say that the most important thing is the service that you all provide, is the action item, right? I mean, it's what you are doing. And the most important thing we have to be driven by, in this really hard moment that we're in politically, we have to be driven by how can we best serve the people or the organizations or whatever it is that we're doing. And that might mean that we're going to have to be smart about the way we present what we do to the government. And it's hard to wrestle with that, I think, as we try to be true to our values and who we are. And I don't think we need to ever turn our backs on the people that deserve our services. But I think the way that you're presenting grants, the way that you're talking about the programs that are working on the ground, I think sometimes, I think those are decisions you all have to make as you are presenting to the federal government these programs. And I think that's understandable because, quite frankly, this is my opinion, is that the folks that are making these decisions at the federal level, a lot of the grants are getting through fine. There's no issues. but sometimes things are being nitpicked that are just not reasonable. And the fact that, if you're doing work on immigration, or if you're doing work in the reproductive health space, or you're doing work to support LGBTQ plus people, or whatever it is that the administration or those selecting the grants might not find, they might find that the government should have no role in, or the federal government should be involved in providing these grants, or that diversity or equity shouldn't be at the center of some of these proposals. Some of these grants are getting slowed or stopped or eliminated. And so I think you have to be thoughtful about how you present that. And I think that I certainly understand that those are decisions that you all have to agree how you're going to navigate that. On our end, we're gonna fight like hell to protect nonprofits, right? And so when it comes to oversight, what would be great about me chairing and having the majority is, on day one, I'm going to stop all these attacks out of our committee to the nonprofit sector. So right now, we're having weekly hearings, bringing in nonprofit leaders from all sorts of different nonprofits, large ones, small ones, attacking their work, attacking the programs, sending out, inquiry letters across the country, also, and it continues on and on. Now, what I think is important for us to recognize is, I always tell people this when people say, "Oh, well, we found these, this is happening, and this nonprofit is doing X." I always say, nonprofits are not perfect organizations, nor is businesses or the corporate sector or government. Like, there are going to be mistakes made. There are going to be things that happen, whether it's in the nonprofit sector or any sector, that we can make improvements on. But making a mistake, or if there's someone taking advantage of a grant or the system, that's not a reason to somehow then hurt the vast majority of people that are getting served by your nonprofit. Right. And I think that's something that we're going to be very clear about. We're always going to want to see improvements to the grant making process, but we're not going to. I don't believe in harming the many for the mistakes of the few, and that we just can't get. So I think that's going to be our response, and then we'll be able to, through the budget process, negotiate with the president and push to support nonprofits and not allow him. Part of our budget negotiations certainly can and will be ensuring that these grants get out the door and these projects get done, because it's not just nonprofits. I mean, we've got infrastructure projects, for example, large ones that have been approved and are just are waiting for the check from the federal government that the federal government has already said that it's coming, and they're just holding it for whatever reason. And so those are some of the problems.
Right. You mentioned another thing, and I went on a tangent there a moment ago and talked about a meeting we had yesterday with Senator Padilla. But the reason we were having that conversation was to sort of tie together the economic power of the sector with the actual mission work that we do. Because folks often, as I know you're aware of this, but often don't realize what a massive economic force the nonprofit sector is. We're 110,000 strong, 450 billion in revenue in California alone on an annual basis. 1.5 million workers. And so that power doesn't often get mobilized. You mentioned another strategy that the administration was using. They tried the funding freeze, the OMB memo back on January 27th last year. We were among those that, with our national partners, filed lawsuits, got those injunctions. That's working, along with the AGs. And they just keep trying new strategies. The most recent being the one you referenced a moment ago, which is earlier this summer, the OMB guidance, all those hundreds of pages of rules changes that would allow OMB to actually politicize the grant making process. From where we sat, we did what we know how to do, which is to organize. We called every member of the congressional delegation, your office included, and we reached out to all of the hundreds of thousands of nonprofits that we have in our network. And I believe the final count was something like 500,000 comments were submitted on those rules. Senate just passed a continuing resolution that included language to put those rules on hold through December 11th, which is a good thing. But wondering where you sit, especially in the accountability side of things, the oversight committee, what other strategies can we use to ensure against that the politicization, which is clearly if this strategy doesn't work, I imagine there's going to be a next one and a next one. Any particular things you think are valuable for the sector to do, to act on, to speak out about?
Well, let me just start by saying that actually the advocacy you all have done already has actually been very successful. And I want to just first double down on what you're already doing, because when, if you go back to the start of administration, when there was the whole, we're going to stop these grants and we're halting all this federal funding. I just locally, I put together a call with our nonprofits. We had like 600 people on, and including folks that were, politically that supported the president, right? That had voted for the president, that were supporters of his, and the organizing that you guys did around reaching out to the administration, reaching out to other senators, other members of Congress, that actually works. Like, people need to hear from our nonprofit organizations. That is really, really important. And so the organizing you guys are doing by putting in public comment, by calling offices, by connecting, actually does work. And so I just want to reinforce first that piece of it, because I think you're going to need to continue to do that as this other rulemaking is happening. And I'm also very grateful that the rulemaking process is being kind of pushed back a little bit, which is a really good sign. The second thing, and you've had success, is, listen, I don't think people understand that as much as I might disagree sometimes with the Supreme Court on certain decisions, over all the courts, you look at all of the courts in its entirety have been really a place where a lot of, I think, the worst impulses of the administrations as it relates to nonprofits have been slowed or stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the courts have been really a positive bright spot in forcing the administration to get grants out the door, to not politicize the grant making process. And look, there have been some decisions that have been made by the Supreme Court and others that have been harmful, I think, to nonprofits.
Mm-hmm.
But I think overall, the courts have been a really good place to get some victories.
Great.
I think moving forward, just staying politically engaged. I think I had seen a comment like here. I mean, look, here's the reality: is like nonprofits are. We think of nonprofits like, oh, we're not getting into the politics, or our 501c3 status or this or that. Like, I get all that. Nonprofits are political. You have to think about politics, and doesn't mean that you're all going to have the same political perspectives, but politics impacts what happens to all of you every day. How much grant funding there is, who's getting the grants, and so I think that being engaged in the politics of it and reaching out to members, writing letters, making calls, organizing, having your people you serve engage in a way that doesn't violate your nonprofit status, of course, is really important. So those are some thoughts on that.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. In fact, that's a good opening for we love to talk about this. This is one of our favorite subjects, which is that nonprofits need to be more politically engaged, not less. But of course, that firewall is partisanship, and that's what a lot of folks don't necessarily understand. Is that we are absolutely we cannot endorse or oppose parties, candidates. We that's off the table. But you spoke earlier about the importance of political engagement, and I think the one thing we can all consensus around is the importance and centrality of the nonprofit sector and the social safety net that we help to provide it, in addition to the other work. One of the ways we do that, obviously, as you just noted, is advocacy. And 501c3 public charities do have broad permission. And in fact, I would say encouragement to engage in policy work, not partisan work. But that in itself is being attacked right now by the Trump administration. I mean, they obviously, I assume, see how effective it is. And there are many proposals that have been floated and comments made about trying to limit the ability of 501c3 public charities to engage in policy debate, conversations, discussion, et cetera. How do you and your colleagues look at that, and what might you do or might you be doing to defend the right, the First Amendment speech rights of nonprofit public charities against an administration that would rather we not be speaking out?
Well, there's no question that the administration is trying to limit a lot of free of speech, protected speech, whether it's for nonprofits or other types of organizations. And so I think you guys should continue to fight that. You have absolutely every right to be involved in policy in the policymaking process. I mean, policymaking is impacting what happens to all of you. It's impacting the amount of grants that are available. It's impacting everything. And so, I would encourage you guys to continue to be involved in the policy making, and with your members of Congress and in the Senate and directly with the administration as well. And so, all of that's important. I think I believe that there are very different perspectives from folks in Congress and the administration about the central role that nonprofits play, and who nonprofits should serve. I think one of the big fights that we're in right now is this idea of the impacts of whether it's race or sexual orientation or immigration status, and how those should impact federal grant making. And it's a fight we're going to have to continue having. I think that nonprofits should be, as long as you're following the rules and you're certified and you're going through all the things that you all need to do, you should be able to serve the communities that your boards and others are intending to serve. And I don't think the government should be nitpicking who you are intending to serve, because at the end of the day, I think it's not written down anywhere. There's no nonprofit like Bible anywhere. But I do think that, broadly speaking, when I view a nonprofit, I think nonprofits are there, ideally, at least for me, to help the people that need the most help. And and that's not the case for every nonprofit, obviously, but I think that's when nonprofits were developed and built to fill the gap, right? I mean, you're doing things that the government can't do, private sector can't do or shouldn't do, and oftentimes that is helping people that are falling through the cracks that are not being served by the system. And so I think that advocacy work is going to be important for you all to continue.
Great. I appreciate that, and that obviously is what we try to do too. It's interesting when you mentioned the investigative power of the committee and the administration's particular use of it, and how it might be different under your leadership. What is the balance between those entities that we don't want to see investigations obviously into folks for their missions? That said, the nonprofit sector, the worst thing for us is a scandal breaks. We don't want to see a scandal. We do want the bad actors out of the system. They are very few and far between. The damage they do to all of us is probably greater than anyone else. When you think about those investigative powers, do you have a vision of how that looks differently in the future?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to spend our precious kind of investigative staff and our team of lawyers and investigators on going after what I don't believe to be the top issues that are facing the country right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm just not interested in. It's not on the agenda to investigate. Nonprofits are not the problem in the United States right now. So the problems in the United States are, in my opinion, are the corruption that is happening at the government. It's people and it's large corporations and folks that are stealing people's wealth and hard-earned labor and enriching themselves. And I'm much more interested in asking tough questions of AI companies, or asking tough questions of members of the Trump family, as to why they're billions of dollars richer, than I'm about nonprofits that are trying to help people. That, yes, there are going to be some bad actors, but that's not the big issue. The big issue is people can't afford the groceries, they can't afford the rent, they can't afford healthcare, and while people can't afford all of these things, there's folks in government that are enriching themselves, and I think that's wrong. I think that's where our investigative focus is going to be.
Right. We've talked about all these challenges coming our way, and of course we're all living through them, and that's why we have hundreds of folks out here to hear you today. Sort of zooming out, any advice or anything you want to share, just in a message? You mentioned how effective some of that advocacy can be, but to the folks listening right now that are just feeling exhausted and beat up by this constant barrage of attacks and narratives, anything you want to share with folks, just to keep the hope alive, so to speak?
I mean, I think, I have been very down on the future of our country on us for a few years. It's been rough. I feel like we're going through a very hard time. It's very partisan. I think our institutions have been under attack. I think nonprofits have been under attack. I think just being a good human has the what being a good human and the definition of that has really taken a turn for the worse. And so I think I've been very feeling helpless. And I think in the last year, I have felt better, and I felt like there's some hope that I've seen people across the country organize and kind of pick themselves back up and say, you know what, enough, and we need to change. And I've seen people demand change from government, even in a way that's bipartisan. Also, like a lot of the problem, it's not a Republican Democrat problem. A lot of the problem is like there's just too much corruption in government, period, and things are just done all the way. Like like people lose hope when like all of these members of Congress are trading stocks and enriching themselves. I don't trade stocks. Members of Congress shouldn't be allowed to trade stocks in Congress. It's like, give me a break. You get privileged information. It's so crazy to me. And yet everyone is enriching themselves. And so I get why people are down on government, both sides. But finally, I feel like there is an energy with people that they want to make change. They want to take on the establishment. They want to, quite frankly, as far as I'm concerned, take on the administration that I think has done immense damage. And so I'm hopeful that things are going to get better. And it starts with hopefully, what I believe is in our best interest, which will be a divided government where you'll have a Republican in the White House and we'll have hopefully Democrats, as far as at least that's what I think, controlling the House and the Senate. And I think we're going to have better outcomes then. So.
Right. Well, I appreciate that. I know I want to do a time check. You have a few more minutes, or are we?
I probably have time for another quick question or so.
All right. There's a couple in the chat and the Q&A that I think might be helpful just for folks to understand the landscape. One here from Irma Cooper about coordination. Does the Oversight Committee work with state leadership, attorneys general and others when sort of prioritizing how to use the time and resources they do have available?
Constantly. Yeah. And I talk to RAG all the time. There's absolutely advocacy that happens. We're talking to nonprofits all the time, to be honest, particularly the ones that are under attack or being called in to testify. So yes, the answer is yes.
Great. Yeah, just yesterday I was with some of the leadership of some of our most fierce immigrant community defenders and folks at Chirla and others talking about how they're managing through this time. Are there resources or particular things that you would want to make sure people know, those that are being attacked? And again, you named, DEI, immigration, LGBTQ communities, the folks that are being most targeted right now. Anything that you want to make sure our crew here knows as far as folks to reach out to, resources they may have at their disposal that they're not aware of, folks they could be getting in touch with, either with your office or other members?
Yeah, well, first, I would always make sure that as a nonprofit that you're always connected to whoever your member of Congress is, whether that's a Republican or Democratic member of Congress. So you should be connected. You should visit their office. You should talk to their staff. They should know who you are. Like, that's one thing that I think is really important. And then secondly, if you're ever targeted, you should let that member of Congress know. If you feel targeted, if you think that congressperson is going to be friendly to your cause. If you're ever targeted by like a congressional committee, then you should definitely, that's where we come in. And I think that's where the Oversight Committee, you should let us know. And we have a huge team that deals with all these issues pretty quickly.
Great. I'll throw one more brief one here. Actually, I know this is not something any individual can answer, but the other big focus, and you mentioned it earlier in your comments, is all of the cuts to our social safety net with HR 1. Obviously, health and food supports and security are the big things on many organizations' mind. A lot of that work is done through nonprofit partnerships. Any comments on just sort of what you're seeing, what the opportunities to either roll back, forestall, or otherwise mitigate the impacts of those cuts?
I mean, it's really rough. Let me just say that one thing I've learned is that there is enough money in the government to fund everything we want to fund. We just choose not to do it. So don't ever believe that there's plenty of tax money. We're all paying way too much and not getting enough in return. And the folks that are actually you know, it's a system that is broken, and where the folks at the very top and the ultra wealthy continue to get huge tax breaks and pay little comparatively to what everyone on this call is making. And I think that's really, really sad and corrupt, quite frankly. And large corporations and the very wealthy continue to get massive tax breaks and incentives to grow their companies. I mean, I think it's so funny, where you're all scrounging and hoping for a grant that is life-saving for your organization, and the corporate sector is completely dependent on government funding. I mean, they act like they don't, but everything that I mean, I think it's hilarious. Like a company like Amazon, who's very successful and it's great. I mean, they're completely dependent on on us, on the port of Long Beach and Los Angeles. It's a government operation. They're not paying enormous money to use all of this infrastructure we have built to move goods around the world. Right. They pay such a small fraction of and then they use it to make more profit and, in my opinion, not pay their employees enough. So I think that we've got to reimagine our government and give more money to nonprofits and get more money out the door and make sure that more people have funds. The fact that the administration has cut food assistance, health cuts, Medicaid in California, I mean, all shameful, horrific. People are really struggling. I know that's where you all are coming in. And so just, thanks for keeping up the good work, and we'll continue to all work together.
Thank you so much. Congressman Robert Garcia, 42nd District, California, ranking member of the House Oversight Accountability Committee. Thank you so much for spending some time with us this morning.
Thank you all.
And thank you all for joining us. As promised, we will get some resources and follow-up out to everybody who signed up for today's webinar. Thank you to the hundreds of you that did join us. And please stay tuned. We'll have much more in the coming days and weeks as we're in this intense policy and political season. And we look forward to you all joining us here at Cal Nonprofits. Thank you.